I died on a rainy Tuesday. The monitor flatlined in a sterile room that smelled of industrial bleach and decaying hopes. No family, no friends, just the lingering memory of Peyton's triumphant smile standing over the ruins of the life she stole from me. So when I opened my eyes and found myself staring at the velvet canopy of my childhood bed, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just pressed 2 fingers to my warm, beating pulse and exhaled. The air in my bedroom was thick with the scent of Evelyn's expensive lavender diffusers. I sat up. The sheets were silk cold against my skin. My hands weren't scarred from the factory job I'd taken after they cut me off. They were smooth, young. I glanced at the digital clock on the nightstand. October 14th, the night of the autumn gala. The exact night my life had spiraled into the gutter. In my past life, this was the evening Peyton took a pair of fabric shears to her own custom Dior gown, threw herself down the sweeping mahogany staircase, and wailed that I had attacked her out of jealousy. I had spent that night screaming until my throat bled. I had begged my parents to look at the angles of the cuts. I had grabbed my fiancé Damien by the lapels, pleading with him to believe me. They didn't. Evelyn slapped me. Arthur froze my accounts. Damien held a sobbing Peyton against his chest and looked at me with a disgust so profound it had burned itself into my retinas. That was the night I became the unhinged, violent pariah, and Peyton became the fragile saint. A sharp, synthetic cry echoed from the foyer downstairs, right on time. I stood up. I didn't rush. I walked over to the vanity, picked up a heavy silver brush, and ran it through my hair. I watched my reflection. My eyes looked different. The naive, desperate girl who just wanted her biological parents to love her was dead. The woman looking back was a ghost, occupying a borrowed body, completely, entirely hollowed out of anything resembling familial affection. I set the brush down and walked out into the hallway. I stood at the top of the stairs and looked down. The tableau was identical to the nightmare I'd relived 1,000 times. Peyton was crumpled at the base of the steps, the pale blue tulle of her dress shredded around her knees. Evelyn was on her knees, clutching Peyton's face, her manicured hands trembling. Arthur was standing over them, his jaw clenched so tight the muscle twitched. Damien had just rushed through the front door, his tuxedo jacket flapping open. "Nora," Arthur barked. His voice boomed, rattling the crystal pendants on the chandelier. "Get down here, right now." I descended the stairs, step by step. The marble was cold under my bare feet. I didn't hurry. I didn't cower. "Look at what you've done." Evelyn hissed, her eyes wet. She glared at me, a venomous maternal rage, directed at the daughter she birthed in defense of the daughter she bought. She just wanted to show you her dress. You couldn't stand it, could you? You couldn't stand that she looked beautiful. Peyton buried her face in Evelyn's neck. She let out a ragged, theatrical sob. "Mom, please, don't be mad at her. I know she didn't mean to push me. She was just upset." The scissors were right there. Damien stepped forward. He looked up at me, his handsome face contorted with righteous anger. "Are you sick, Nora? Are you actually out of your mind? You could have killed her. In the past life, this was my cue. The desperation would claw up my throat. I didn't do it. I wasn't even in the room. Look at my hands." Now, I looked at Peyton's shredded dress. I looked at the pristine silver shears, sitting conveniently on the bottom step. Then, I looked at Damien. "She's bleeding, Damien," I said. My voice was entirely flat. It sounded foreign, even to me. You should probably call a doctor instead of yelling at me." Silence slammed into the foyer. Evelyn stopped rubbing Peyton's back. Arthur blinked the rehearsed reprimand, dying on his tongue. Even Peyton's sobbing hitched breaking rhythm. For a fraction of a second, they were braced for a fight. They had armed themselves for my hysteria, my messy, ugly tears that would validate their narrative of my instability. My indifference stripped the oxygen from the room. "What did you say?" Arthur demanded, stepping toward the stairs. I repeated, maintaining eye contact with my father, that if she fell down a flight of marble stairs, she might have a concussion. Or are we skipping the hospital and going straight to the police? Peyton's head snapped up. Her eyes were red, but the panic flashing in her pupils was genuine. The police meant questions. The police meant looking at the trajectory of the fall, the clean edges of the fabric cuts. "No," Peyton cried out, perhaps a little too quickly. She coughed, softening her voice. "No police, Daddy, please. I don't want to ruin the family name. I don't want Nora to go to jail. I forgive her. I just want to rest." "You're a saint, Peyton," Damien murmured, kneeling beside her. He shot me a venomous look. "You don't deserve her forgiveness, Nora." "I agree," I said. Damien frowned. "What?" "I don't deserve it. Keep it." I turned on my heel. "I'm going back to bed. The dress is ruined, so I assume we're skipping the gala. Turn the lights off when you're done in the foyer." I didn't wait for a response. I walked back up the stairs. My posture was straight. I felt Arthur's glare burning into my spine, felt the utter confusion radiating from the three people kneeling on the floor. I walked into my room, shut the door, and locked it with a heavy, satisfying click. I leaned against the wood. My heart was beating at a normal, steady pace. My palms were dry. No panic, no heartbreak, just peace. The absolute intoxicating peace of not giving a damn. The next morning, the house was suffocatingly quiet. I woke up at 6, packed 2 large suitcases, with only the essentials clothes I bought with the money from my grandmother's trust. My laptop, my documents. I left the designer bags, the jewelry Evelyn had gifted me, for photo ops, the keys to the Porsche. They were strings. I was holding the scissors now. I dragged the suitcases down the hall. As I passed Peyton's room, the door creaked open. She stood in the doorway, wearing a plush silk robe. There wasn't a scratch on her, not a single bruise from her supposed tumble down 14 marble steps. She looked at my suitcases, her brow furrowing. "What are you doing?" she asked. The sweet, fragile tone she used for our parents was gone. This was the real Peyton. Sharp, calculated probing. "Leaving," I said, not breaking my stride. She stepped out, blocking my path. "You can't leave. Dad grounded you. You're supposed to be in your room thinking about what you did. Move, Peyton." She crossed her arms, a smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "Running away just proves you're guilty, Nora. It makes my story look even better. Mom spent the whole night crying about how unhinged you are. Damien said he's going to talk to his parents about breaking the engagement." She wanted me to snap. She wanted the fight. She fed on my reaction like a parasite. I let go of the suitcase handle. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the 3-carat diamond engagement ring Damien had given me, and dropped it into Peyton's palm. She flinched, staring at the ring. "What is this?" "It's what you want," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The ring, the parents, the house, the pity. Take it all. I'm done playing tug-of-war with a pig in the mud. You can have the mud." I grabbed the suitcase and walked around her. "You're bluffing." She called out, her voice pitching up, grazing panic. "You have nowhere to go. You have no money." I kept walking. I dragged the bags down the stairs, the wheels thumping rhythmically against the marble. Arthur was sitting at the head of the dining table, drinking black coffee and reading a tablet. He didn't look up when I entered the room. "If you're coming down to apologize, Nora, you can save it. I'm calling your therapist today. Your behavior last night was erratic and dangerous." I pulled a crisp, white envelope from my purse and tossed it onto the glass table. It slid and hit his coffee cup. He finally looked up, his brow thunderous. "What is this?" "A cashier's check," I said, "for the tuition you paid for my first 2 years of college, plus the estimated cost of room and board since I turned 18. The rest of my grandmother's trust is being transferred to a private account this morning." Arthur stared at the envelope. He didn't open it. The color slowly drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" "I'm moving out, permanently." "Sit down, Nora," he ordered, the fatherly command that used to make me freeze in my tracks. "You are throwing a tantrum because you got caught acting out. You will not leave this house. You don't own me, Arthur." The use of his first name struck him like a physical blow. He stood up, knocking his chair back. "You disrespectful little—" "Save it." I cut him off. I looked at the man whose approval I had literally died trying to earn. He looked small, just an angry, rigid man who preferred a compliant lie to an inconvenient truth. "If you try to stop me, or if you freeze my remaining accounts before the transfer clears, I will take the security footage from the hallway cameras to the police. The ones you forgot record angles of the top of the stairs." Arthur froze. There were no cameras. I knew that. He knew that technically, but rich men with secrets always second-guess their own security systems when threatened. The sheer confidence in my voice planted the seed of doubt. "Goodbye, Arthur," I said. I walked out the front door. The morning air was crisp. I loaded my bags into a rideshare I'd hailed 10 minutes prior. As the car pulled out of the gates of the estate, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. My phone buzzed constantly. Texts from Evelyn, missed calls from Arthur. Then a text from Damian Peyton showed me the ring. "If this is a stunt to get my attention, it's pathetic. We need to talk. Meet me at the club at noon." I blocked his number. Then I blocked Arthur's. Then Evelyn's. Finally, Peyton's. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. The knot in my chest, the one that had been wound tight for 22 years, finally unspooled. I was out. A month passed, 30 days of absolute, uninterrupted silence. I rented a small, clean apartment in a neighborhood my parents wouldn't be caught dead driving through. I finished my degree online. I drank cheap coffee and ate takeout, and for the first time in my life, I could breathe without rationing the air. I secured a junior analyst position at a mid-tier venture capital firm. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't have the prestige of my father's company, but the paycheck was mine. The desk was mine. The quiet was mine. I knew the peace wouldn't last forever. Peyton was a creature of validation. Without me to serve as the villain in her daily melodrama, the family dynamic would inevitably shift. She needed a contrast to shine. Without the bad daughter to point at her own cracks would start to show. I just didn't expect her to crack so quickly. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at a corner table in a quiet downtown cafe, reviewing a startup's financial projections, when a shadow fell over my laptop. I looked up. Damian. He looked tired. The usual arrogant gleam in his eye was dulled. He was wearing a casual sweater that looked wrinkled which was wildly out of character for him. "They said at your old firm you'd changed jobs," he said, pulling out the chair opposite me without asking. "Took me 2 weeks to track down your new office. Your receptionist told me you come here for lunch." I slowly closed my laptop. "You're trespassing on my lunch hour, Damien. What do you want?" "You blocked me." "That is generally how breakups work, yes." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Nora, please, stop this. Peyton is a wreck. Your parents are a mess. Arthur's blood pressure is through the roof. You made your point. You proved you can survive on your own. Now it's time to come home and apologize." I stared at him. The sheer audacity of his delusion was almost fascinating. He truly believed the world still revolved around the axis of their estate. "I'm not making a point," I said, picking up my paper cup. "I'm living my life. You should try it. Peyton misses you," he blurted out. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was a short, dry sound that startled him. "Peyton misses her punching bag. How are things, Damien, truly?" Without me there to take the blame for every broken vase, every missing dollar, every bad mood. Who is she blaming now? His jaw tightened. A micro-expression of guilt flitted across his eyes. Bingo. "She's just stressed," he muttered defensively, "with the wedding planning." "You're marrying her?" I asked, completely unfazed. He looked taken aback by my lack of emotion. We're engaged. Yes. Last week. She needed stability after you abandoned the family. Congratulations. I'm sure you two deserve each other." I opened my laptop again. "Now, if you don't mind, I have actual work to do." He slammed his hand flat onto the table, rattling my coffee. "Damn it. Nora, look at me. You don't get to just turn off. You loved me. You spent 4 years trying to convince me you were good enough for my family. And now, you just... What? You just don't care." "That's exactly right." "You're lying," he sneered. "You're just trying to hurt me. And it's pathetic. But fine. If you want to play hardball, let's play. Peyton is presenting at the Young Innovators Summit tomorrow." My fingers paused on the keyboard. The summit. I remembered it from my past life. It was a prestigious networking event. In the old timeline, I had built a comprehensive market analysis model. Peyton had stolen the flash drive, presented it as her own, and won a massive grant. I had tried to expose her, but Arthur intervened, threatening to have me blacklisted from every financial institution in the state if I embarrassed her. "Good for her," I said smoothly. "She's presenting a predictive algorithm model," Damien said, watching me closely for a reaction. "She said you were helping her with the data entry before you left, but she finished the core architecture herself." A slow, cold smile spread across my face. "She stole it. She actually stole it." Before I left the house, I had wiped my personal laptop, but I had deliberately left a decoy folder on the shared family cloud drive. It was labeled YIS_final_model. It looked identical to the real project I had been building. It had all the complex charts, the dense terminology, the slick UI mock-ups. But the underlying math was completely intentionally broken. I had inverted the decay rates and fabricated the historical data points. To a layman, it looked like genius. To a panel of expert judges, it would look like the work of a con artist who didn't understand basic calculus. In my past life, she stole the finished, perfect product. This time, because I left before I could finish it, she stole the poisoned bait. "I didn't help her with anything," I said to Damien. "If she built it, she built it. I hope the judges ask her detailed questions about her methodology." Damien frowned. He wasn't getting the hysterical jealousy he came for. You're not even going to fight for credit. Credit for her work, no. I looked him dead in the eye. Make sure you sit in the front row tomorrow, Damien. You won't want to miss a second of her presentation. He left, looking more confused than when he arrived. I watched him walk out of the cafe. I picked up my coffee and took a long, slow sip. The coffee was bitter cheap and slightly burnt. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. My new boss, Harrison, was a man who communicated entirely in grunts and sharp nods. He was a veteran of the venture capital trenches, holding a deep disdain for inherited wealth and an even deeper respect for cold, hard data. So when he dropped a VIP lanyard on my desk Friday morning and told me we were scouting the Young Innovators Summit, I simply nodded and grabbed my coat. I didn't tell him my sister was the keynote presenter. He didn't need to know my ghosts. The auditorium was a cavern of velvet and polished wood, packed with investors, tech journalists, and old money aristocrats pretending to understand software. Harrison and I took seats in the middle rows. I scanned the front. There they were, Arthur sitting rigid with paternal pride, wearing his bespoke navy suit. Evelyn adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet, looking perfectly poised, and Damien leaning forward, an eager proprietary smile on his face. The lights dimmed. The moderator introduced Peyton. She walked out to thunderous applause. She wore a tailored white pantsuit, a deliberate departure from her usual tulle and lace. It screamed serious intellectual. She looked beautiful, fragile, and brilliant. The perfect prodigy. "Good morning," Peyton said into the microphone. Her voice was steady, honey-sweet. "Today, I want to talk to you about the future of predictive market analytics." Behind her, the massive LED screen flashed to life. It displayed the title slide of the presentation I had meticulously started and deliberately ruined. She began her pitch. I had to hand it to her. Her memorization skills were flawless. She hit every beat, emphasizing the buzzwords with practiced hand gestures. She talked about neural networks, data decay, and asymmetric risk profiling. The crowd was captivated. I watched Damien beam, elbowing a colleague next to him. But I wasn't watching the crowd. I was watching the panel of 5 judges seated at the edge of the stage. 3 of them were smiling, clearly charmed by the performance. But the remaining 2, a stern, silver-haired woman from a leading data science institute named Dr. Eris Miller, and a notoriously brutal angel investor named Linus, were frowning. They were leaning over the printed dossiers in front of them, whispering. Peyton reached the climax of the presentation, the core algorithm architecture. She clicked the remote. The screen displayed a massive, sprawling equation surrounded by impressive-looking scatter plots. By synthesizing these inputs, Peyton concluded, flashing a dazzling smile, we can achieve a 94% accuracy rate in predicting microfluctuations in quarterly tech stocks. Thank you. The applause was loud. Peyton soaked it in, closing her eyes for a brief, theatrical second. Then the Q&A began. "Miss Peyton, is it?" Dr. Miller's voice cut through the lingering applause like a scalpel. She leaned into her microphone. "Fascinating presentation. Visually stunning. Thank you, Doctor." Peyton beamed. "I do have a minor point of clarification." Dr. Miller continued pushing her glasses up her nose. "On slide 12, your primary variable for historical market weight, you've mapped the decay rate inversely to the chronological data points." Peyton's smile stiffened. "Just a millimeter." "Yes, to account for market volatility. But doing that," Linus chimed in, leaning back in his chair, means you're assigning higher predictive value to data from 10 years ago than data from 10 days ago. That mathematically guarantees a false positive in any real-world simulation. A ripple of low murmurs swept through the front rows. Harrison, sitting next to me, let out a low whistle. He's right. It's completely backward. Peyton swallowed. Her eyes darted toward Arthur in the front row. Well, the algorithm adjusts for that internally. How? Dr. Miller asked flatly. The equation you showed us on the final slide lacks any normalizing coefficient. In fact, if you plug actual numbers into the formula you just proudly displayed, the output isn't a percentage. It's a negative integer. Dr. Miller paused, letting the silence stretch. It's gibberish. The air in the auditorium evaporated. Peyton gripped the edges of the podium. Her knuckles turned stark white. The charming, fragile prodigy was gone, replaced by a deer caught in the blinding headlights of an oncoming train. Peyton stammered. The microphone picked up her ragged breath. The data entry was handled by a subordinate. There may be a visual typo on the slide. A typo. Linus chuckled a dry, unforgiving sound. Miss Peyton, the entire premise of your conclusion relies on this math. There's a whiteboard right behind you. Could you perhaps write out the corrected base equation for us? We're very eager to see the real mechanism. My heart beat a slow, rhythmic drum in my chest. Peyton turned her head to look at the whiteboard. It stood there, blank and terrifying. She looked back at the crowd. She looked at Damien, whose smile had vanished, replaced by a deep, confusing frown. She looked at Arthur, who was staring at her with wide, unblinking eyes. She didn't know the math. She didn't even know what a normalizing coefficient was. Peyton's voice cracked. Her hands began to tremble visibly. I'm feeling a little dizzy. Right on cue. When backed into a corner, deploy the victim card. She swayed, stepping back from the podium, and deliberately let her knees buckle. She collapsed onto the stage with a soft thud. Gasps echoed through the room. Damien was out of his seat, instantly vaulting onto the stage to gather her in his arms. Arthur was yelling for a medic. The moderator rushed to the microphone to declare a 10-minute recess. Harrison stood up, shaking his head. What a complete disaster. It's not a typo, she's an absolute fraud. Good Lord, the audacity to present that to Eris Miller. Yeah, I said quietly, remaining in my seat as the chaos unfolded below. A real shame. I watched Damien carry Peyton off the stage. There was no blood, no torn dresses, just the undeniable public exposure of her own incompetence. And this time, there was no sister to blame. I didn't plan on lingering. I had seen what I came to see. I excused myself from Harrison, citing a quick trip to the restroom, and headed toward the side exit of the convention center. I was almost to the revolving doors when a sharp voice echoed across the marble lobby. Nora! I stopped. I didn't tense, but a familiar dull exhaustion washed over me. I turned around. Arthur was marching toward me, his face an angry mottled purple. Evelyn was trailing behind him, her heels clicking frantically. A few yards back, Damien was standing near a plush sofa where Peyton was currently recovering from her fainting spell, sipping a glass of water and weeping delicately. Arthur closed the distance, stopping just inches from me. He looked down, his eyes blazing with a fury that just a month ago would have sent me spiraling into panic. You did this, he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. You set her up. I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't a towering patriarch anymore. He was just a middle-aged man desperate to protect an investment that was rapidly losing value. "Hello, Arthur," I said evenly. "Nice to see you too. Don't play games with me," he snarled. "Peyton told us everything. She said you left that file on the server. You deliberately planted false data to sabotage her presentation." I tilted my head, letting a slow, incredulous smile touch my lips. "Let me make sure I understand this. You are publicly accusing me of sabotaging Peyton." "Yes," Evelyn interjected, stepping up beside him. Her eyes were red, furious. "How could you be so cruel, Nora? To your own sister in front of the entire industry. By leaving a file on my own private password-protected partition of the family cloud, I continued ignoring Evelyn entirely. A file that I abandoned a month ago. Tell me, Arthur, how did Peyton present my private unfinished file today?" Arthur opened his mouth. Then he closed it. The reality of the logic hit him a physical obstacle he couldn't bully his way through. If she built the algorithm, she would know the math. I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the vast lobby. If she understood the data, she would have caught the errors. But she didn't, because she stole it. She broke into my drive, copied a file labeled draft, and stood on a stage, claiming she was a genius. "You did it on purpose to embarrass our family," Evelyn cried, her voice echoing shrilly. A few straggling attendees turned their heads to watch. "I left this family 30 days ago," I replied. "What Peyton does with the trash I left behind is entirely her own business." Footsteps approached. Damien stepped into our circle. He looked hollowed out. His eyes darted between me, Arthur, and then back to Peyton, who was watching us from the sofa. Her crying momentarily paused as she monitored the confrontation. "Is it true?" Damien asked. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual arrogance. He looked at me, a desperate plea for me to tell him I was lying. "Did she steal it from you?" "Ask her, Damien," I said softly. "Ask her what the decay rate of the historical variables was. Ask her to explain the project she just spent 6 months supposedly building, while you two were busy planning a wedding." Damien swallowed hard. He looked back at Peyton. For the first time in his life, the rose-tinted glasses were off. He was seeing the cracks. "We are going to sue you for corporate sabotage," Arthur threatened, though the fire had clearly left his voice. It was a desperate, hollow bluff. "Do it," I challenged him. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Subpoena the servers. Let's get a digital forensics team to look at the access logs. Let's put it all on public record in a courtroom. The date she accessed my partition, the IP address. Let's show the whole world exactly who the thief is." Arthur flinched. He stepped back. He knew. Deep down, he had always known what Peyton was. But acknowledging it meant acknowledging his own failure. It meant admitting he had coddled a parasite while casting out his own flesh and blood. "You're a monster, Nora," Evelyn whispered, tears finally spilling over her mascara. "You have no heart. You cut it out of me a long time ago." "Evelyn," I said, entirely deadpan, "you should be glad. It makes me very efficient." I turned my back on them and walked out the revolving doors. The cold city air hit my face, crisp and clean. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Harrison. "Where are you?" "We have a lunch meeting with Eris Miller." She liked my question. "Get to the steakhouse on 5th. I typed back a quick affirmation and hailed a cab. I didn't look back at the glass walls of the convention center. I didn't care if Peyton was crying, or if Arthur was yelling, or if Damien was finally waking up to his nightmare. The first domino had fallen, and the rest of their house of cards was leaning heavily into the wind. 6 months. It takes roughly 6 months to build a reputation if you do the work, and exactly 1 afternoon to destroy it if you don't. I spent the winter with my head down, grinding through the data. I took the real algorithm, the corrected, robust model that Peyton had failed to steal, and integrated it into a proprietary forecasting tool for Harrison's firm. We used it quietly at first. Small, cautious trades on emerging tech sectors. When the model accurately predicted the sudden collapse of a major logistics startup 3 weeks before the CEO was indicted, Harrison stopped treating me like a junior analyst. He moved me to a corner office with a window overlooking the skyline. He doubled my salary. I didn't buy designer clothes or a flashy car. I bought peace of mind. I invested heavily. I bought a condo in a secure, quiet building where the concierge didn't ask questions and the neighbors kept to themselves. Meanwhile, the ripples from the Young Innovators Summit had turned into a tsunami for my former family. It wasn't a sudden cinematic explosion. It was a slow, agonizing bleed. Investors at Arthur's firm had watched his golden child daughter immolate herself on stage, and worse, they watched Arthur furiously try to defend the indefensible. Word travels in elite circles. The whispering started. If Arthur is so easily duped by his own daughter, how closely is he looking at our portfolios? Damien and Peyton's wedding, which was supposed to be the social event of the spring, was abruptly postponed indefinitely. I saw the announcement in a brief, buried column in the society pages. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply turned the page and drank my coffee. In late April, the firm sent me to the Zenith Charity Gala. It was an unavoidable part of the job, shaking hands, making small talk with people whose net worth rivaled small nations, and sniffing out the bleeding edge of the market. I wore a simple, elegant black gown. No massive diamonds, no ridiculous trains. Just sharp, clean lines. I was standing near the ice sculpture discussing a potential seed round with a biotech CEO when the crowd parted slightly. Arthur and Evelyn walked into the ballroom. They looked different. The polished, unassailable aura they used to project was fractured. Arthur looked exhausted. His shoulders slumped beneath his tuxedo. Evelyn's smile was tight, brittle. Her eyes darting nervously around the room to see who was watching them. And trailing behind them, clinging to Arthur's arm, was Peyton. She looked a shadow of her former self. The bright, confident prodigy was gone. She looked small, her eyes downcast, wearing a dress that looked a season out of date. They hadn't seen me yet. "Excuse me," the biotech CEO said, following my gaze. "Isn't that Arthur? I heard his firm is hemorrhaging clients after that disaster his daughter pulled at the summit. Such a shame. A man's legacy ruined by a child's ego." "A shame," I echoed, my voice completely neutral. I turned back to the CEO to finish our conversation. I didn't intend to confront them. They were ghosts to me now, haunting an entirely different world. But gravity has a funny way of pulling debris together. 10 minutes later, I was walking toward the bar to get a sparkling water when someone stepped into my path. "Nora." I stopped. It was Damien. He looked awful. He had lost weight, and there were dark bruised circles under his eyes. He held a glass of scotch, the ice clinking violently against the crystal because his hand was shaking. "Hello, Damien," I said. "You look." He swallowed hard. his eyes raking over my composed posture, the calm authority radiating from me. "You look incredible." "Thank you." "Excuse me." I tried to step around him. He shifted to block me again. "Please, just talk to me for a minute. We have nothing to talk about." "I broke off the engagement," he blurted out. The words hung in the air, desperate and heavy. 2 months ago, I couldn't do it anymore. The lying, the constant victimhood. Every time I looked at her, I saw what you tried to tell me all those years. I felt absolutely nothing. No vindication, no sympathy, just a profound emptiness where a desperate girl used to live. "Congratulations on your newfound vision," I said dryly. "I suggest you take it to an optometrist to make sure it lasts." "Nora, I was wrong. I was so damn blind. I let them manipulate me. I let her play me." He reached out his fingers, grazing my arm. "I miss you. I miss us. We could start over. I know you're doing well now. We could be a power couple, just like we planned." I looked at his hand on my arm. Then I looked up into his eyes. "Damien," I said, my voice soft but cold enough to freeze nitrogen. "If you don't remove your hand, I'm going to signal security to escort you out for harassing a guest." He flinched, pulling his hand back as if he had been burned. "There is no start over," I continued, holding his gaze. "The girl who loved you died the night you chose to comfort a liar over believing your own fiancé. You don't miss me. You miss being right. You miss the comfort of a woman who bent over backward to make you feel tall. I don't bend anymore. Nora." A sharp, hysterical gasp interrupted him. I looked past Damien's shoulder. Evelyn was standing a few feet away, her hands clamped over her mouth. Peyton was standing beside her, staring at me, with a mixture of absolute terror and raw, unadulterated envy. I had changed. The nervous, eager-to-please posture was gone. I stood tall, occupying my space with absolute certainty. Peyton looked at my dress, at the effortless confidence, at the way Damien was looking at me, like a drowning man looking at a life raft. Peyton's lower lip trembled. The tears welled up, automatic and reflexive. Evelyn took a step toward me. "Nora, is that really you? Oh, my sweet girl. Look at you." She extended her arms, a mother ready to welcome back the prodigal daughter, now that the daughter was shiny and successful again. I didn't move. I simply raised an eyebrow. "You're making a scene." "Evelyn," I said, quietly, ensuring only they could hear, "I suggest you gather your remaining dignity and walk away before your daughter faints again and ruins another rug." Evelyn froze, her arms dropping to her sides. The maternal facade shattered, replaced by the ugly, bitter reality of a woman who realized she no longer held any power. I gave them one final dismissive glance, turned my back, and walked away. I walked out onto the terrace. The night air was cool against my skin. The city stretched out before me, a sprawling grid of lights and infinite possibilities. I took a deep breath, the clean, sharp oxygen filling my lungs. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was entirely, undeniably. Autumn turned to a bitter, unforgiving winter. The frost on my condo windows matched the absolute coldness with which I operated at the firm. I had become Harrison's favorite weapon, a quiet, ruthless analyst who didn't let emotion cloud evaluation. On a Tuesday morning in early February, Harrison called me into his office. He didn't offer me a seat. He simply slid a thick, heavy dossier across his glass desk. The tab on the side was a glaring, angry red. "Take a look at the target." Harrison grunted, turning to stare out at the gray skyline. "They're bleeding out. The board wants to acquire the underlying assets and scrap the rest. We buy the debt for pennies, liquidate the bad portfolios, and absorb the remaining Tier 1 clients." I opened the folder. The logo at the top of the first page was a gold crest. Caldwell Financial, Arthur's firm. I stared at the balance sheets. The numbers were catastrophic. It wasn't just a slow quarter. It was a total, unmitigated freefall. Following Peyton's very public humiliation at the summit, the whispers about Arthur's competence had evolved into a deafening roar. 2 of his anchor clients had pulled their funds in November. To cover the sudden liquidity crisis, Arthur had over-leveraged his own equity betting heavily on a volatile pharmaceutical merger that had collapsed in December. He was drowning. His legacy, his pride, his name, all reduced to red ink on my desk. "You want me to lead the audit?" I said. It wasn't a question. Harrison turned around, leaning against the glass. He knew my last name used to be Caldwell. He knew exactly what he was doing. "Can you handle it? If it's too close to home, I can give it to Gregory." "Gregory is sloppy with distressed debt," I replied, closing the folder. "I'll have the preliminary teardown on your desk by Thursday. We move in on Friday." 3 days later, I walked through the double-glass doors of Caldwell Financial. The last time I was here, I was 19. I had brought Arthur a coffee, desperate to show him my college transcript. He had made me wait in the lobby for 2 hours before having his assistant tell me to go home. The receptionist, a woman named Sarah, who had worked there for a decade, looked up from her desk. Her eyes went wide. "Nora." "Hello, Sarah," I said smoothly. "I'm here from Vanguard Capital. The audit team is right behind me. We need the conference room, and I need unrestricted access to Mr. Caldwell's office." Sarah swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she reached for the phone. He didn't say it would be you. He didn't know. I didn't wait for her to announce me. I walked down the long, mahogany-paneled hallway. The air felt heavy stale. Several cubicles were empty, the personal belongings boxed up. The sinking ship was already shedding its crew. I pushed open the door to Arthur's corner office without knocking. He was standing behind his desk, staring blankly at a muted television screen playing the financial news. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, the sharp lines of his face sagging with exhaustion. The bespoke suit hung loosely on his frame. He turned. When he saw me, he physically flinched. "Nora," he breathed. A mixture of horror and profound shame washed over his face. "They sent you." "Vanguard sent their lead analyst," I corrected, dropping my briefcase onto his immaculate desk. "It's nothing personal, Arthur. Sit down. We need to go over the margin calls from Q4. He didn't sit. He walked around the desk, his hands raised in a placating gesture. The arrogant patriarch was gone. In his place was a desperate, broken man. "Nora, please, you have to listen to me. If Vanguard buys the debt, they'll gut the firm. They'll fire everyone. My name will be ruined." I opened my briefcase and pulled out my laptop. "Your name is already ruined. Vanguard is just pricing the scrap metal. Do you have the login credentials for the offshore accounts, or do I need to get my IT team to bypass your servers? I'm your father." He barked a sudden, desperate flare of his old temper. I stopped typing. I looked up. The silence in the room was absolute. "My father," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "cut me out of his will when I was 21 because I refused to apologize for a crime I didn't commit. My father watched his stepdaughter destroy my reputation and handed her the knife to do it. "You are not my father, Arthur. You are a failing portfolio. Now sit down and give me the passwords." Arthur stared at me. He searched my eyes for a flicker of hesitation, a drop of daughterly pity. He found a void. His shoulders collapsed. He sank into his leather chair, a defeated, hollowed-out shell. He reached for a piece of paper and slowly wrote down the administrative passwords. I took the paper. I didn't feel a rush of triumphant adrenaline. I didn't feel joy. I just felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a math equation finally balancing out. The news of the impending Vanguard buyout leaked to the financial press by the end of the week. The articles were ruthless. They chronicled Arthur's disastrous fourth quarter, hinting heavily at the familial instability that had triggered the downward spiral. It was over. The Caldwell estate was quietly listed for sale. The cars were being repossessed. I worked late that Friday. The streets were slick with freezing rain when I finally walked out of my office building. I pulled my wool coat tight around my neck, heading toward the parking garage. A figure stepped out from the shadows of a concrete pillar. I stopped my hand, instinctively reaching for the pepper spray on my keychain. Nora. It was Peyton. I barely recognized her. The glossy extensions were matted and wet from the rain. She was wearing a trench coat hastily thrown over a pair of sweatpants. The designer makeup she relied on was smeared, giving her the appearance of a bruised, exhausted raccoon. She was shivering violently. "What do you want, Peyton?" I asked, my voice flat. I didn't move closer. She took a step toward me. "They're taking the house, Nora. The bank. They came today. I'm aware of the foreclosure schedule. It's standard procedure for a Chapter 11 filing." "Stop talking like that," she screamed. The sound echoed harshly in the empty, damp garage. "Stop talking like a robot. It's our house. My room. Mom is packing her bags. She's leaving Arthur. She told him he's a failure. Damien won't even return my calls. I have nothing. You have what you earned," I said. She choked out a sob. It wasn't the delicate, calculated crying she used to manipulate Arthur. It was an ugly, guttural sound. Pure panic. The parasite had killed its host, and now it was starving. "I'll confess," she blurted out, stepping closer, the desperation rolling off her in waves. "I'll tell the press everything. I'll tell them I pushed myself down the stairs. I'll tell them I stole the algorithm. I'll clear your name completely. Everyone will know you were the good one. Just tell your boss to stop the buyout, or give me some of your trust money. I know you still have it. Please, Nora, I can't be poor. I don't know how." I looked at her. I really looked at the girl who had been the architect of my misery for so many years. In my past life, she had seemed like a towering, insurmountable monster, a mastermind of psychological warfare. But standing here, under the flickering, fluorescent light of a parking garage, she was just pathetic. She wasn't a mastermind. She was a coward who had weaponized her own fragility because she had absolutely no other skills. "I don't need your confession, Peyton," I said quietly. She blinked, freezing in place. "What?" "The world already knows I'm competent, and they already know you're a fraud. You proved that on a stage in front of 500 people." I stepped around her, walking toward my car. "Your confession is worthless to me. Just like you." She spun around her face, twisting into a mask of pure, venomous hatred. "You're empty. You're a cold, empty bitch. You're enjoying this." I unlocked my car door. I paused, looking back at her one last time. The rain was blowing into the garage, hitting my face. I felt the chill. I felt the keys in my hand. I felt the steady, calm rhythm of my own breathing. "I'm not enjoying this, Peyton," I said, and it was the truest thing I had spoken in 2 lifetimes. "I don't care enough about you to enjoy it. You are a stranger to me. Have a good life." I got into my car. I shut the door, cutting off the sound of her screaming my name. I started the engine, put it in drive, and pulled out of the garage. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I merged onto the highway. The city lights blurred in the rain, painting the windshield in streaks of gold and red. I turned on the radio. It was playing a soft jazz tune. I drove home. The Vanguard acquisition of Caldwell Financial closed on a bleak, unforgiving Tuesday morning in late March. I woke up at 5. The sky outside my window was a bruised, heavy purple. I didn't rush. I made a cup of pour-over coffee, watching the dark liquid drip slowly through the filter. I drank it black, sitting on the edge of my unmade bed, listening to the city wake up. Garbage trucks grinding their gears, the distant wail of an ambulance, the ordinary magnificent sounds of a world that didn't care about the Caldwell name. I dressed with deliberate care. I didn't choose the power suits I used to wear when I was trying to prove I belonged. I chose a simple, impeccably tailored charcoal blazer, a white silk blouse, and trousers. Minimal makeup, hair pulled back. I looked like exactly what I was, an auditor who was there to process a transaction. Nothing more. When I arrived at the Vanguard offices, the atmosphere on the 40th floor was aggressively sterile. Fluorescent lights hummed. The carpets absorbed the sound of my heels. Harrison was already in the massive, glass-walled boardroom. He was drinking espresso from a tiny paper cup, reviewing the final term sheets. "They're coming up the freight elevator," Harrison said, without looking up. Building security didn't want the press swarming the main lobby. Apparently, a photographer from the Financial Times caught wind of the signing. "Generous of them," I murmured, taking my seat to his right. I arranged my pens perfectly parallel to my legal pad. "You ready for this?" Harrison finally looked at me, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in a rare display of paternal concern. I know who he is. If you need to step out, I can handle the ink." "I'm fine, Harrison." My pulse was a steady, boring 70 beats per minute. "Let's get it done." 5 minutes later, the heavy oak door swung open. Arthur walked in. He was flanked by 2 cheap, frantic-looking corporate attorneys. The high-priced legal team that had been with Caldwell Financial for 3 decades had abandoned ship weeks ago when Arthur's retainers started bouncing. I barely recognized the man standing across the room. The towering, immaculately groomed patriarch of my youth was entirely gone. His skin was the color of old parchment. The bespoke navy suit he wore hung loosely on his frame, the fabric bagging around his shoulders. His tie wasn't perfectly straight. It was a minor detail, but for a man who used to fire junior analysts for scuffed shoes, a crooked tie was a surrender flag. He didn't look at me at first. He sat down heavily in the leather chair directly across the table. His lawyers began aggressively organizing their cheap, flimsy folders, whispering to each other in panicked, hushed tones. "Gentlemen," Harrison barked, cutting through the noise. "The terms are locked. The board voted at midnight. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to sign the transfer of debt, the liquidation schedules, and the forfeiture of the Caldwell brand. I assume you've read the documents." One of the lawyers swallowed hard. "Yes, Mr. Harrison. We've reviewed them with our client." Harrison slid the massive 2-inch thick stack of contracts across the polished mahogany table. The tabbed pages stuck out like little yellow teeth. Sign on the tabs. Initial the margins. Arthur stared at the stack of paper. He reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen resting beside the documents. He couldn't do it. His hand was shaking so badly he couldn't get the nib to touch the paper. He closed his eyes, taking a ragged, uneven breath. The silence in the room stretched thick and suffocating. Then he looked up. He bypassed Harrison completely. His bloodshot, hollow eyes locked onto mine. "Nora," he croaked. His voice was raw, stripped of its booming, commanding baritone. It sounded like sandpaper scraping against dry wood. "Is this what you wanted?" The two cheap lawyers froze. Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I didn't break eye contact. I looked at the man who had ordered me to stay in my room while my sister shredded her dress. I looked at the man who had frozen my bank accounts, who had threatened to ruin my career, who had looked at me with absolute disgust when I begged him to believe me. "I don't know what you mean, Arthur," I said evenly. "To see me destroyed." He leaned forward, his voice cracking. "To sit there and watch me lose my grandfather's firm. To watch me lose everything. Are you happy now? Is the vengeance sweet enough?" He wanted a fight. He desperately, fundamentally needed me to scream at him. He needed me to gloat. If I gloated, it meant I was vindictive. It meant I was the villain, and he was the tragic victim. If I showed anger, it meant there was still a connection between us. It meant he still mattered to me. "I didn't destroy you, Arthur," I said. My voice was completely, utterly devoid of malice. It wasn't cold. It was just empty. You made a bad investment. You put all your capital into a liar because she told you what you wanted to hear, and you discarded the asset that actually produced value. You ignored the data. Arthur flinched, as if I had struck him. "The market doesn't care about your feelings, Arthur." I continued leaning back slightly in my chair. "It only corrects inefficiencies. You over-leveraged your equity to cover a fraud. You were inefficient. Vanguard is just pricing the scrap metal." He stared at me. The tears finally spilled over, tracking through the deep wrinkles around his eyes. My clinical detachment was the executioner's final blow. He realized in that exact second that I truly felt nothing for him. He was a bad stock I had shorted, and I was just here to collect the payout. Arthur lowered his head. He pressed the pen to the paper. The scratching sound of his signature echoed loudly in the quiet boardroom. Page after page. A rhythmic scratching countdown to 0. He was signing away the firm. He was signing away the sprawling estate. He was signing away the cars, the status, the legacy. He was signing away the identity he had worshipped above his own flesh and blood. When he finished, he pushed the stack across the table. He stood up slowly, looking like a man who had forgotten how to walk. He didn't look at me again. He didn't say goodbye. He just turned and walked out of the room, his shoulders slumped, his footsteps heavy and dragging. The lawyers scrambled to grab their briefcases and scurried after him. The heavy oak door clicked shut. Harrison let out a long, low whistle. He pulled the stack of contracts back across the table, inspecting the signatures. "Well, that's done. The PR team will issue the press release in an hour." "Good," I said. I closed my laptop. "I'm going to take an early lunch." I spent the afternoon walking. The weather had cleared, leaving a crisp, biting chill in the air. I walked through the park, watching the wind strip the last of the dead leaves from the oak trees. I didn't feel a sudden cinematic rush of joy. I just felt incredibly light. The invisible backpack I had been carrying for 2 lifetimes had finally unclasped. Over the next few weeks, the final pieces of the Caldwell wreckage washed ashore, appearing in the brief, buried columns of the financial and society pages. Evelyn's divorce had been finalized rapidly. Without the firm and the estate, Arthur had no use for her, and she had no use for him. She had managed to secure a meager settlement from the liquidation remnants, just enough to afford a 2-bedroom condo in a loud, crowded suburb she used to openly mock at charity galas. I heard through the grapevine that she spent her days drinking cheap Chardonnay and cornering her new neighbors, telling wildly exaggerated stories about her former wealth to people who didn't care. She didn't take Peyton with her. Peyton's fall was the quietest, which I knew must have been the most agonizing for her. There were no cameras, no dramatic courtroom scenes, just irrelevance. Stripped of the Caldwell money and the protective bubble of Arthur's influence, the tech community blacklisted her permanently. She had quietly relocated to a small landlocked town in the Midwest to live with Evelyn's sister. The girl who had thrived on destroying others for the spotlight was now working a mundane administrative job, entirely erased from the public consciousness. She had no audience. For Peyton, that was a fate far worse than death. And Damien, the golden boy who had stood by Peyton, holding her while she cried fake tears. After the Caldwell collapse and his own very public association with a known fraud, his family had cut their losses. They didn't disown him, but they exiled him. He was quietly reassigned to manage a small, failing logistics warehouse in Ohio. His tailored suits were replaced by fluorescent vests and clipboard inventories. The empire he was supposed to inherit had locked its doors to him. The slate was wiped clean. The rot had been completely excised. That Friday evening, I went home early. I unlocked the door to my condo and stepped inside. It was perfectly, wonderfully quiet. The minimalist furniture, the clean lines, the absolute absence of clutter. It was exactly how I liked it. There were no crystal vases waiting to be purposefully shattered. No sweeping marble staircases. I walked into the kitchen and put a kettle on the stove. I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city grid. The streetlights flickered on a sea of amber and white, cutting through the gathering dusk. I thought about the rainy Tuesday when I died. I remembered the sterile smell of the hospital room, the crushing, suffocating weight of dying unloved, screaming the truth into a void that refused to listen. I remembered the sheer, blinding panic of waking up back in that velvet bed, knowing I had to navigate the snake pit all over again. I pressed 2 fingers to the inside of my wrist. My skin was warm. My pulse was strong, thumping in a steady, relentless rhythm. Alive, alive, alive. Revenge wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a dramatic screaming match in the rain or a dagger in the dark. It was simply the act of cutting the cord and walking away. It was stepping out of the mud and letting gravity do the work. They were heavy, selfish people, and without me holding them up, without me serving as the foundation for their lies, they had dragged each other into the abyss. The kettle whistled, a sharp, clear note in the silent apartment. I walked over, poured the boiling water over a handful of loose chamomile leaves, and watched the water turn a deep, rich gold. The steam rose, smelling faintly of earth and honey. I wasn't the ghost in the foyer anymore. I wasn't the scapegoat. I wasn't the desperate, hollowed-out girl begging for scraps of affection from people completely incapable of giving it. I was Nora. I was alive, and I was finally, undeniably free. I lifted the mug, letting the heat seep into my palms, and took a long, slow sip. It tasted perfect. Nora's journey proves that the ultimate revenge is simply moving on and letting the toxic people in your life destroy their own house of cards. She didn't have to lift a finger. Peyton Arthur and Damien handed themselves their own karma. Sometimes silence and success are the most devastating weapons you can wield. What did you think of Nora's final confrontation with Peyton and Arthur? Did they get exactly what they deserved? Or was the financial ruin too harsh? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you love this story of rebirth and cold retribution, hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more deeply grounded, emotional audio dramas.